We are ready to get started. Thank you for joining us today for Resume Writing 101, How to Write a Resume as a Military Veteran. We've put together a great webinar for you today. We know that writing a resume can be a frustrating experience, particularly for those who haven't written in civilian format before. The do's and don'ts and best practices of making your resume stand out from the rest aren't always easy to find. Fortunately, RecruitMilitary has been in the business of helping veterans find jobs for over 15 years, and we want to share our experience with you today. We've been hosting job fairs for military veterans for the past 9 years. We've hosted about 650 events during this time. Today we'll cover what makes the best and worst resumes, the basics on how to structure a resume, and how a good resume can help you land a job. My name is Liz Wheeler. I'm the social media manager here at RecruitMilitary. Joining me today for this webinar is Mike Frankum, former Army captain and Senior Vice President of Marketing here at RecruitMilitary. Mike has worked in the field of veteran hiring for years and brings an incredible wealth of knowledge. At the end of this webinar today, we will be hosting a live question and answer, so be sure to stick around for that. If you have any technical difficulties during this webinar with the GoToWebinar feature, please let me know. Use the chat box attached to the toolbar on the right-hand side of the page. If you have any other questions or comments related to the content of the webinar during the course of the presentation, feel free to use that chat box as well. I'll try to answer throughout the webinar, as well as answering at the end during the question and answer session. We will be recording and uploading this webinar to YouTube. It will be available after it airs live, probably 24 to 48 hours post-airing, so you'll be able to find it on our social media channels, including Facebook, Twitter, or our YouTube channel, LinkedIn as well. On that note, we will flip to the first slide and begin Resume Writing 101, How to Write a Resume as a Military Veteran. Mike, do you want to take over?
Thanks, Liz. And like Liz mentioned, as I share things with you today, hopefully what I want to do is make what Liz mentioned can be a frustrating experience and give you a few tips to make it a little simpler. After having spent the last 16 years now in the military veteran recruiting niche, I've worked with a lot of companies and a lot of veterans and helping them make the transition and find their next career. So what I hope to do is give you some information that will make this resume writing task a little bit easier for you. And really, anything that we share here today is not earth-shattering. It's very basic, but that's because a resume is very basic. When you think about a resume, I want you to think of it as your marketing piece. And because of that, think of what works well when you are seeing marketing happening out in the world. And what works well are those things that are attention-grabbing and are able to convey what it is that that product, that service, or whatever is being presented, what it can do for you. And so you want to think of it in that context and be able to show what you can do for that employer. That's what the resume is intended to do. So with that, how do you do that in the best way possible? First off is to make sure that it just presents you in the best light possible and as a professional. And the way you do that is to make sure that you are error-free. And that includes spelling and grammar errors. Errors are really the first discriminator as an individual looks at resumes. I remember when I was doing a lot of recruiting here over the years, and I'd have a pile of 15 resumes. I would very quickly scan the resumes, and my first scan was to find out which ones to weed out. And the way I did that was to look for errors. So I didn't even really look at content. I looked for errors. So I looked for spelling errors. I looked for grammatical errors. And if I found them, that individual, frankly, went into the not this time pile. And what I tried to do is get those 15 resumes down to a manageable 5 or 6 resumes who I then could have phone calls with. And that may sound a little harsh, may sound a little bit like you might be missing something as a recruiter, but as a recruiter, you just flat out don't have the time to do more than that, and you have to find ways to quickly weed people out of the process. And that's what's happening when you're submitting resumes to corporations, and you may be wondering, why am I not getting callbacks, and why is this not happening? Well, is part of it because maybe your presentation or your resume maybe has some errors in it. And so, as it mentioned here, we only have one shot at that first impression. And that first impression, as I've just mentioned, I literally would take the first 10-second look of a resume and see if I could find errors on it. And if I found errors, they immediately went into the pile of no. So your resume got 10 seconds of viewing in my eyes. If I didn't find errors, went into the pile of yes, and then I would go take a deeper look at it on my next pass. A lot of recruiters operate that way, but that's just something you want to be aware of. And on the formatting side, make it easy to read. If all I'm going to do is look at it for 10 to 30 seconds, make sure that it's not just paragraphs. If it's dense and wordy, recruiters aren't going to read it. They just don't have time to. You have to make your best accomplishments and achievements and all that you've done jump off the page. And the way you do that is by using clear, concise bullet points with phrases, not paragraphs. And as you think about a length of a resume, no more than 2 pages total, especially if you are looking for a job in a private industry. Now, noted that federal resumes, if you're applying to the federal government, don't do just 2 pages, because they want you to get, and basically they want you to tell this story in a much deeper way. So expanding on things with paragraphs on a federal resume isn't necessarily a bad thing, and you almost need to for federal resumes. So if you're going for federal positions or government positions, you need to think about it in a different way. What we're going to focus on, because with the predominance of the work that we do and most veterans go into, our careers with non-governmental agencies. So I just wanted to touch on that difference between federal resumes and those in general industry. So Liz, next slide. Important, regardless of whether you are in a federal resume or the regular industry resume, is that you use the right keywords. Now, the keywords are important in today's world because, as most of you know who are looking for jobs, you're applying online a lot. And what you're applying to are these things called applicant tracking systems. And these are automated systems that look for keywords to help the recruiter so that it indicates you have the experience that's desired by that company. Well, how do you know what the experience is that's desired? It's by reading the job description. So when you're looking at job descriptions for companies, really encourage you to, especially if it's a position that you're extremely interested in, make sure that words that you see in that job description are the words that you're using in your resume, because by doing that, you will make your resume come up to the top of the list and actually make it in front of a live person, a live recruiter. If you don't take that step and you just use one resume for every job that you would ever apply to on the internet, you might get lucky on some and have them fit what the company is looking for. But in most cases, your resume may not even make it in front of a human being to actually take a look at, because the tools, the automated tools that the corporations are using are looking for the keywords, and if you don't have the keywords in there, they're not going to pass you through to the next step in their process, in their automated process. So please keep that in mind. Again, it's one of those things that I oftentimes hear frustration from people about. I get it. I understand it. Being a recruiter who placed people in companies before, I would sometimes get frustrated with that process. But the frustration can't preclude you from doing what you need to do, because that's the world we live in. That's the reality of hiring today, is with especially any company of any size is going to have that type of automated process that you need to make it through. So make sure to read that description and get those keywords into your resume. And then also research your desired industry for industry-related keywords and include those in your resume. So if you are interested in and have a background, let's say, in transportation and logistics, and you're looking at a supply chain management type position, make sure you're using keywords and words that are relevant to that industry when applying to that job. And by doing that, again, you're just going to make yourself stand out, and you're going to actually get through those automated systems that are out there, and you're going to get in front of recruiters. And if you structure your resume the right way, you are actually going to be able to allow the recruiter to quickly see the experiences that you actually have. Liz, do you have any additional comments as someone who has not served in the military, also thinking about reading those who've come from the military, their resumes, on how keywords can help you, the non-military experienced person, potentially evaluating someone?
Yeah, this is a really important point. Like Mike said, I haven't served in the military. I do work in a military industry, but even being surrounded by that on a daily basis, I'm not always familiar with the military acronyms, with the military jobs, or even with military phrases. So doing your research on what the industry-related keywords are, and by industry-related keywords, I mean the keywords that translate from military to civilian. So if you have one job in the military, not just putting the keywords for that particular job directly on your resume, but looking up what the equitable job in the civilian world is to what your role was in the military and using those keywords, that illustrates to me as a civilian much more clearly what you've done. And instead of reading over a resume that's full of military speak and saying, okay, cool, not really sure what this person did in the practical sense, I then have a better idea and can read over the resume and say, oh, I see exactly what this person's experience is. They'd be qualified for this job. So those keywords, especially the industry-related keywords, not just the military-related keywords, are a very important part of your resume.
All right, thanks, Liz. Next slide, please. As we think about being professional, writing matters, and how you present yourself in writing matters greatly. Watch out for some little things like your email address that you put onto a resume. And these two email addresses you see here as examples are real ones I've seen on resumes. And just think of, when you see those email addresses, what kind of stuff gets into your mind and what you are already thinking about that person just by the email address. So I really encourage you to utilize an email address if you have kind of a personalized one, and create another one that you'll use just for your job search, and use your name in some fashion is what I would recommend. So for instance, I always have an email address for different things that is just my first initial last name, so it might be mfrankum@gmail.com. Have something generic like that, and it also reinforces your name. Remember, think of a resume as marketing, so it's branding of you. You're telling your story. You want your name to be imprinted on the vision of that person who's looking at your resume as many times as possible. So you've got your name at the top of the resume, and you've got your email address at the top of your resume. And if your email address is your name, you're just reinforcing that in the email address. So again, those kind of wild email addresses, get them off your resumes. I actually saw another one this week that I just couldn't believe. Someone was looking for a job on, and it said sexybody76@gmail.com. I mean, I'm never going to call that person as a recruiter, just unless, you know, maybe you're a recruiter for a bodybuilding agency or something. I mean, maybe that would be someone who would give you a call. But most businesses, if they see an email address like that, are just not even going to call you. It's going to be an immediate knockout for you. Don't use abbreviations, slang, or profanity, and use proper grammatical structure in your sentences. As you're creating profiles online in these different systems and you're building your resume, just watch out for the military jargon and abbreviations, and spell things out so that it's in a form that everybody can understand. And really do not use slang of military sort, especially, because most people won't understand that. And really, profanity should just go without saying. It just has no place in a job search at all. So just, if you're someone who likes to use colorful language, find ways to tone that down in every way throughout your job search. Also,
if I may interrupt for just 1 second,
yeah.
these things might go without saying, but you'd be surprised at how often we see, like in the words that you just used, colorful language or slang, as well as abbreviations that aren't even true words that, yes, we use in our day-to-day conversations, but you want to make sure that you're using proper grammar and proper English words. Even if it looks pretentious to you, when you structure that on your page, it will, I promise you, recruiters will immediately disqualify you if you're using slang words that have only been invented in the last 2 years, or if you use any kind of profanity, even if it's acceptable in the military workplace. So be sure to read through that objectively to make sure that none of that is in your resume.
Yeah, great point, Liz, because what we're seeing more and more of on resumes is what I call text language showing up on resumes and cover letters. And by text language, I'm referring to those nice abbreviations and slang that people use in text messaging between one another. It has no place in the presentation on a resume. So great point there. Also, watch out for strange fonts, colors, graphics, or photos. A resume is just not the time to be cute or really try to stand out and be different in those ways. The way you stand out to be different is to have accomplishments and achievements highlighted on your resume in a way that a recruiter can see and understand very quickly. That's what's meaningful to a recruiter. The fact that you can use some wingdings and some nice pretty font isn't going to be too meaningful unless you might be interviewing for a graphic design type position. But even then, I wouldn't say that's the best way. Save the cute stuff and the creative stuff for a portfolio if that's the type of position that you're recruiting for. Keep your resume as your professional presentation of who you are, and that will go a lot longer for you. And also stick to standard fonts like Arial, Times New Roman. Those are two basic ones. And another reason you want to do that and use black font and don't use graphics on your resume is that I mentioned those applicant tracking systems. If you use those different fonts and different graphics and things like that, you may actually be causing the system to immediately eliminate you from it because the applicant tracking system will not be able to read those different fonts or capture photos and graphics, and therefore may just discard your resume right from the beginning. So very important, just keep it in kind of standard fonts. As far as like font size, somewhere between 10 and 12 point font is the appropriate size. And make sure that as you are looking at the margins on a page, try to have somewhere between a half an inch to an inch margin on all sides, and that'll make it a very readable resume as well. Next slide, Liz. So thinking about translating from a military to civilian language, please don't assume that the recruiter that is going to read your resume, and you've probably heard this, but again, it's amazing what we see on resumes, is just recruiters don't understand military language or acronyms or the jobs that you've held. So make sure that you're putting them in terms that people will actually understand who haven't been in the military. A military occupation specialty means very little to a civilian, if anything. Most are not going to know what they mean. So you're going to have to think about that job that you did in the military and think about how to describe that in a way that a person who hasn't served really understands. And I always say, just pretend you're explaining your job to your non-military mother and then spell it out. Explain what your day-to-day responsibilities were, what you did, what you managed, how many people you led, and what were those things that you were responsible for on a daily basis. And that's what you bring out on your resume. As an example, someone on a resume that's a military person might just place on a resume, or might be tempted to place on a resume that they were a 91 Bravo MOS in the Army. If that's all you put on a resume, no one's really going to know what that is that you actually did. So another way to say that is what we have below, which is served as a wheeled vehicle mechanic in the Army and was responsible for vehicle maintenance and managed a team of 5. So that's very easy to understand. You did maintenance on wheeled vehicles, and you were responsible for the maintenance of vehicles in your area of operation, and you managed a team of 5 individuals. Now from there, people will ask you further questions, but that's a very easy, simple way to explain what it is that you did. And that's the way that you want to present yourself and help translate from a military to a civilian recruiter. Next slide, Liz. Some examples of some good tactics and not so great ways of doing things. You've got your paragraphs. We mentioned don't have it in paragraphs, but do things in bullet points. So you might be tempted to say, on this job, I was responsible for the task of managing people, and I also took care of the budget spends for ads. And under my tenure, we grew our department by 10% and increased client retention by 25%. Actually, there's great stuff in there. In this, gave some detail about how they grew their department, increased client retention. So these are all things that are important to businesses, but it's kind of hard to read. The bullet points really help bring it out, and now I'm able to, and notice how there's the use of numbers in those bullet points. So managed a team of 12 employees. Great. That tells me about the size of team that you led, and I can understand that whether I served in the military or not. Responsible for budget allocation and the spend for digital advertising and print advertising. The only thing that would make that budget stronger, or that bullet stronger, is if you actually had something in there about the size of that budget. Maybe it was a $8,000 monthly budget or something along those lines. That would be a way to make that bullet possibly stronger. Grew the department by 10% in a 2-year period. So notice how in that upper paragraph we wrote out 10%. Here actually used 10%, the number with the percentage sign. Notice how that percentage sign with the number stands out on the page. So my eyes as a recruiter automatically go there. Increase the retention rate by 25%. Again, very easy to see, and the numbers there speak for themselves. So next slide, Liz. So on thinking about that military to civilian transition, on the military side, if you're a 11 Bravo squad leader in the Army, that might be tempting to just place that on your resume, because you and anybody who would have served in the Army, there's a lot you read into 11 Bravo. I was an Army guy myself, so being 11 Bravo, I already know what an infantryman in the Army does, and so I'm placing all of that knowledge that I have as an Army person into that, and I can get what I need to from that, just those 6 words there. But on your resume, the way you might want to say that is served as a team leader of 9 infantrymen and trained the team to work cohesively and efficiently in chaotic and fast-paced combat environments. So there you're telling a little bit more of a story. You're giving the size of the group that you led and that you trained the team and you had to work cohesively and efficiently, and you had to do that in chaotic and fast-paced places. So it gives more of a description, and it's also in a way that someone can actually understand who would be reading this. They'd have a better likelihood of understanding what that is. And so when you think about breaking down your MOS or your military experience, again, go back to putting it into the simple terms of telling your mom or your aunt who's never been in the military or been around the military, and try to break it down and tell them what it is that you do, and that'll really help out. Liz, next slide. And then just thinking about keywords versus general. And by general, what we're referring to is just having a general, like a summary statement at the top of your resume or something, where you might say, I'm interested in this position because I'm qualified in the various areas of the job and have experience in all of them. Now, that may be natural to say that you read the job description and, yes, I feel I'm qualified for all of these. However, that's not going to help you when it comes to all these automated systems. So what you may find to be more beneficial for you would be to have you, especially, this is very helpful when you're looking for specific industries and you have a wealth of experience in a particular industry. So what I've displayed here is if you happen to be in logistics or transportation, you would be able to create a section perhaps that would just be related to your experience and say experience includes, and literally just list those keywords that are specific to logistics. So supply chain management, hazmat, shipping and receiving, fleet management, asset management, whatever it might be, the change management, MRP, warehouse operations. So all of those keywords then would potentially be picked up, and what you're doing is you're creating then the keywords for the machine to pick up so that that machine moves you on to the next phase of the evaluation process with the company. Liz, next slide. Lastly, we really think, or really encourage you to try to think like a hiring manager. Now, if you haven't been a hiring manager, that may be a little bit difficult, but what I really encourage you to do is to think about, put yourself on the other side of the interview or the evaluation or reading of your resume, and think about what's important to you. As someone who is going to hire someone, what you want are people that are can be autonomous, that can take direction and execute and do it well and represent you professionally, and also that really have the skills needed to perform the job that you are looking for someone. So the basics to help you get through that hiring manager are spelling and grammar. Why as a hiring manager am I looking at that? Because if they're going to do reports for me or if they're going to write in this position, I want to make sure that they do things in an exacting way. Formatting just makes it easier for me, the hiring manager, to read. Remember, my time is very limited, and so I want to make it as easy as possible on the reader. Keywords, the keywords are primarily for the automated systems. So that keyword section on a resume can be very important to help you, especially when you are targeting a specific industry. Be professional. No strange fonts or colors. Again, remember the fonts and things are important as it relates to some of those automated systems out there. Make sure you translate that military to civilian so that people can understand your experience. And also extremely important is that tailoring of your resume to the job position that you are actually applying to. So make sure you take that time to do that. And so why are they, what are they, you want to really understand what they're looking for in a potential employee, and you find that out by looking at the job description. And remember that it's your responsibility as the candidate to present yourself as the individual fitting the position, and that you are the one that has to communicate your experience to what they need. It's not their job as the hiring manager to figure out what you did and does it fit. It's your job as the applicant to display to them that you fit what they need. Again, a very clear distinction that some folks as they're looking for jobs don't quite always get. And I've seen too many people make the mistake of, I just don't see why they don't see I'm a great person. You may be a great person, but you have to tell your story. And in the search for a job today, telling your story includes a resume or a profile that you would build online. So you have to be able to craft your message in a way that fits that job description that the company is looking for. And that's a real key point to remember. And lastly, we've gone through things pretty quickly here and just hit a high level. If you go to the next slide, Liz, we've got a website, or excuse me, a resume writing guide that has some more tips and best practices. And it also has some example resumes there that show the use of bullets, kind of the margins and formatting and things of that sort that can help you get a picture for the types of things that will help you get through this resume writing task that you have to do while you're seeking a new job. So Liz, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Mike. I also want to mention while we're on this page, in addition to our resume writing guide, we have full webinars on how to translate your military experience to civilian language. You can find those webinars on our YouTube page, which is youtube.com/RecruitMilitary. We have a variety of webinars on different topics that can dive deeper into some of the things we touched on today. Now we're going to start our question and answer session. So in order to ask a question, just click the orange arrow to expand the GoToWebinar toolbar on the right-hand side of the page. Go to the question feature and go ahead and let us know any questions that you have. We'll be answering them for the next few minutes. Also, a reminder is we have recorded this webinar and we will be uploading it on our YouTube page. It'll be available in the next day or two. Sherry, our YouTube website was recruitmilitary.com, or I'm sorry, youtube.com/recruitmilitary. Mike, this is a quick question from Joel. He says, I'm interested in a federal job. Should I include a cover letter with that?
Joel, the federal process is, if you're applying, you know a little bit different. And I've personally never applied for a federal position. But from talking with many folks who are in the federal government, it can be helpful, but more important is that your resume meets all of those requirements that are listed in the job description that the government has put out. Even more so than industry, what government is really going to be looking at is they're going to go down each one of those things that they're looking for, each one of those requirements, and they literally match point to point. Do you meet on your resume these particular things? And if you don't, you kind of get like a negative score on that particular one. So it's very important that you look at it that way and work toward the resume part of it being the most important. And a well-timed cover letter can be good, but the most important thing, from my understanding of the federal process, is that you make sure you meet each one of the requirements, or you find a way to bring out how your experience relates to each one of those requirements that they lay out in the position description.
Marvin asks, and I can handle this one, Marvin asks, what did you say the standard font size was? Typically, Marvin, you wanna stick to a 12-point font. If you have a lot of information on your resume and you're trying to keep it under that 2-page limit, you can lower the size to 11 and possibly 10, but you want to stick between 10 and 12 point font for that. Joe asks, do we want to put awards, decorations, medals on a civilian resume?
You know, that it doesn't always mean a lot. I wouldn't do a laundry list. You know, like if you have some that really stand out, like a bronze star or above, those are going to be things that people will really take notice of. But you know, different things like commendation medals, or just essentially what are campaign medals and things of that sort. A laundry list of those is not going to really do a lot for you. It would be better to actually bring it out in, as you describe a position, if you were awarded a medal for a very specific action or task, that you would just bring that out as one of your major achievements and accomplishments for a particular position that you were in, because then the reader of the resume is able to relate it specifically to a job. So that's much more powerful than just having a laundry list of medals, which to 98% of the people reading the resume is not going to be very meaningful. So that's how I would encourage you to think about medals and awards. Think of them as your accomplishments and achievements, because that's what they really are, and where you can best put those to support the story that you're trying to tell as someone of action and who can get things done.
Patricia asks, what is the best way to condense your resume to 2 pages? Patricia, probably to switch the paragraph format to bullet points. That's really the best way to clearly and concisely state your experience without taking up a lot of physical space. A best practice for that is for each position, identify what the 5 major accomplishments or responsibilities were for that position and list those in a bullet form. Then that'll keep each particular job or each particular job within the military that you've had to a pretty concise format.
And that's great advice from Liz, Patricia. And one more thing is to be hypercritical of what you're thinking of listing. And what I mean by that is, for the position that you're applying to, is it relevant? And ask yourself this very pointed question, and that is, so what and who cares? And if you can't, when you're reading that bullet, have what you put there kind of be meaningful and answer a question of, like, why is that meaningful, or how is that meaningful to the mission in that position, then that's something that you can probably delete. So really, and so you want to be able to quantify and qualify things. And if you're not doing that and you're struggling with the space constriction, be very hard on yourself and ask that question of, what I put here, is it meaningful? And I always personally ask the question when I've helped people write resumes, is I ask them, so what that you did this, or so what does this mean, and who cares about this? And I don't mean that to be in a condescending way. It's just because sometimes you really do need to edit things, and so you need to be brutal on yourself and really make sure that what you're putting down there has direct application to the position that you are applying to. And that's the key thing to remember, is what I'm trying to put down here, does it directly relate to the position that I'm applying to?
Jeffrey asks, how far back in years should you go on your resume? Jeffrey, a good rule of thumb on that is to go back 10 years. Mike, did you have anything to add on that question?
Yeah, I'd say that 10 years in depth, and then if you have more experience than that, it's certainly okay to list those companies and positions, but don't try to get into details. In other words, don't describe those positions. You might just put, what the, U.S. Army infantry various duty stations, June 2000 to June 2010, just as an example, and just have that be a range. But Liz is correct in that 10 years in detail is generally a good guideline to go by.
This is a great question from Esther. She asked, how important is type of resume, such as functional or chronological, in order?
Great question, and it's always easier having been a recruiter and talked to a lot of recruiters, it's always very easy it's easier to follow a chronological resume because you can really make sense of the career path and career track of an individual. But if you are trying to make a complete switch from one industry to another, or just completely different from what you've done, a functional may be more appropriate in that instance. So for the most part, I would say if you are interested in positions that are similar in nature to what you've done in the past, I'd encourage you to find a way to use a chronological, because it's just easier for the reader to understand. If, though, you are making a complete switch and really trying to do something completely different, then a functional is probably going to be the more appropriate way for you to go.
Sean asks, what about cover letters in general? I've avoided in the past writing them in order to get more applications completed. I only submitted cover letters for the jobs that were a really good fit for me. Sean, we will have another, I'm sorry, go ahead, Mike.
Go ahead, Liz. Go ahead.
We will have an upcoming webinar. Our next webinar, in fact, is on cover letters, so be sure to tune in for that. We'll have a date announced for that here in the next couple days. In the meantime, you can go, if you go to our YouTube page, we have a current webinar about how to craft an elevator pitch, and an elevator pitch is the verbal equivalent to a cover letter. So there's some really good tips, like I said, on our YouTube page in the elevator pitch webinar, and the next live airing webinar that we'll be doing is on cover letters, so be sure to tune in for that.
And Sean, real quick, I'd say that you're actually on the right track, that I would probably only take the time to do a cover letter for those positions that I am extremely interested in, and also in those positions where I've done enough research to know who the individual is that I'm addressing in that cover letter. Because if I can't address an individual, or I haven't gotten to a phase of understanding who it is I'm talking to, then it's not going to have as much impact. So I'd really encourage you to do that level of research to do a cover letter, and then it can be very impactful. And it also can be very impactful with smaller companies versus larger companies. Because smaller, you're likely to apply directly to the hiring manager, and in large companies, you're applying to a machine, and most machines aren't going to really read the cover letter.
This is a great question from Kevin. He asks, do you separate military education and civilian education, or list them chronologically?
Say that again, Liz. I'm not sure I got the question.
He asked, do you separate on your resume your military education and your civilian education, or list them combined chronologically?
I would just do that combined chronologically. And in the military, you can get a ton of continuing education, depending on how long you served. So I would really only focus on those schools or things that were major or are relevant to the job that you're applying for. So if you're applying, let's say, for some sort of telecommunications or information technology type role, and you've gone to schools that are specific to those topics in the military, then I would make sure to list those schools, and probably not some of the general ones that you likely attended while in the service as well. So it's more important to make sure you list the major ones, and then those that would potentially be the most relevant to the job. You don't need to do a laundry list of all of the schools that you ever attended in the Army, or I should say in the service, unless they're relevant to the position that you're applying to.
Okay, we're about to run out of time, but we have time for just one or two more questions. Ryan asks, what about volunteer work? Is that something good to include in your resume, or is that something to bring up in person in an interview?
You know, it can be a very positive thing to have on your resume, especially if you were very active and you can relate what you learned, or you know, maybe how it brought you and made you a better person or a better potential employee. It can be very positive in that aspect. And in today's corporate world, many corporations like to see people who are engaged in their community. So that can be a positive thing to have on your resume, but it doesn't have to be very lengthy on your resume. It should probably just be like a one-line, two-line entry at the most, and then find ways to bring that up in the interview process is more powerful.
And one last question from Carolyn. She asks, what is the best way to highlight additional duties? For example, I was the sexual harassment assault prevention officer.
Carolyn, the way to really do that is you likely have held that position, obviously, while you were in another primary role, and that might just be an additional bullet that you place beneath that primary role to show that you had that collateral duty. And again, it would be positive to think of how is that additional duty relevant to the position that I'm applying to, and if not specifically to the position, would the company that I'm applying to find this to be of value potentially? And in your example you gave of the sexual harassment officer, most large corporations would probably potentially find value in your having held that position. So it would, because they likely have similar programs that the military does. So there would be value in bringing that out. I would just bring it out as a bullet within the primary position that you were holding at the time.
And that's going to wrap up our question and answer for today. We thank you for attending Resume Writing 101, How to Write a Resume as a Military Veteran. Be sure to check out our website at www.recruitmilitary.com. We have a lot of great job-seeking resources for veterans there. We host job fairs throughout the country, and you can find a job fair in a city near you by visiting events.recruitmilitary.com. If you have any questions or comments about this webinar, please feel free to reach out to us via email. Like I said earlier, we will be uploading the entire recording onto YouTube, and that will be available in the next day or two. In the meantime, we thank you for attending and have a great day.